The truck driver helped a woman fix her car on the road. But what he discovered afterward would change his life forever. On the deserted roads of Oklahoma, Jack, a lonely truck driver, encounters Emily, a woman in distress, a forgotten farm, secrets buried by time, and something that could change everything. Can a simple roadside meeting transform lives? Discover how fate connects two souls on a journey of mystery, discovery, and purpose. What's hidden on the farm, and how far will they go to find the truth? Jack had always found comfort in the solitude of the roads. His truck, a faithful companion for so many years, was more than just a work tool. It was his sanctuary on wheels. On that sweltering summer afternoon, he was driving his heavy vehicle down a secluded road in rural Oklahoma. The horizon seemed infinite, an endless stretch of arid land, broken only by the occasional rows of trees in the distance. The country music softly playing on the radio reflected his solitary life, but he didn't mind. Jack was used to isolation, or at least that's what he told himself. As he rounded a bend on a secondary road, something unexpected broke the monotony of his journey. A car was stopped on the shoulder with the hood raised. Jack frowned, instinctively slowing down. It was a common sight, but something about the scene made him hesitate. The car, an old model, seemed out of place on that desolate stretch of road. He saw a woman next to the vehicle, struggling with the engine, her body tense and sweaty under the relentless sun. Normally, Jack would have driven past. He wasn't the type to get involved in other people's problems, especially on an isolated road. But something in the woman's posture, something in his own loneliness, made him stop. Maybe it was the way she looked at nothing, as if she were on the verge of a breakdown, or maybe it was the distant echo of his own need for connection, something he had repressed for so long. He parked the truck a few meters ahead and got out, feeling the heat of the asphalt under his boots. As he approached, he observed the woman more closely. She appeared to be in her early 30s, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail, a few strands loose and falling over her face. Her expression was a mixture of frustration and worry, a reflection of the situation she found herself in. "Need some help?" Jack asked, keeping a respectful distance but with a clear intention to offer assistance. The woman turned, and Jack saw something in her eyes that made him pause for a moment. It wasn't just relief. It was something deeper, a vulnerability that hit him in a way he hadn't expected. "Oh, yes, please," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "My car just stopped, and I have no idea what happened." As she spoke, Jack realized there was more to the situation than just a broken car. There was a story there, something that troubled her beyond the immediate inconvenience. He took a quick look at the engine, identifying the problem with the familiarity of someone who had fixed many vehicles over the years. He wasn't a mechanic, but his years on the road had turned him into a natural problem solver. "I'm Jack, by the way," he said, opening the toolbox he carried in the truck. "Emily?" she replied, still a bit hesitant but clearly relieved not to be alone anymore. I was starting to panic. As Jack worked on the car, Emily kept talking, as if she needed to fill the silence to calm her own nerves. She explained that she was traveling alone to a small town where she had inherited a rural property from her family. The trip, which was supposed to be a break to reflect on her life, had turned into a nightmare with the car breaking down. There was a hidden sadness in her words, something that indicated the journey wasn't just about the farm but also about finding a new path for herself. Jack listened attentively as he adjusted the tools and checked the engine. He was curious but tried not to show it. His life on the road was lonely, but he always told himself that was how he wanted it. However, something about Emily made him question that. There was a sense of connection, an urgency to help her that he couldn't ignore. After a few minutes, the engine roared back to life. The sound was met with a laugh of relief from Emily, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You're an angel," she exclaimed, her smile finally genuine. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." Jack shrugged, trying to downplay the gesture. "It was nothing," he replied with a modest smile. "Just did what anyone would have done." But they both knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have stopped on that deserted road, and even fewer would have offered the help he did. Recognizing this, Emily insisted on Jack accepting a lunch as a thank you. She knew a restaurant in the next town, and after some reluctance, he ended up agreeing. There was no rush that day, and something about Emily's company made him want to prolong the encounter. As he got back into his truck, Jack felt a subtle change within himself. Maybe it was the start of something new, something he couldn't yet define but was beginning to feel. Fate seemed to be placing him on a different path, and for the first time in a long while, he was curious to see where it would lead. Rosie's diner looked like it had come from another era. The modest facade, with its faded sign swaying gently in the wind, exuded a sense of nostalgia as if time had stopped there. The formica tables and red stools were a bit worn from use, but they still offered a comforting warmth. When Jack and Emily walked in, they were greeted by the jingling of the bell on the door and the warm smile of a middle-aged waitress. "Welcome. Sit wherever you like," said the woman, her friendliness almost palpable. They chose a table near the window, where they could watch the vehicles parked outside. The late afternoon light streamed through the faded curtains, creating a peaceful and intimate atmosphere. As they waited for their food, the conversation between them flowed naturally, but there was an underlying layer of tension, as if both were aware that what was to come could change their lives. "So, you inherited a property?" Jack asked, finally breaking the silence. Emily nodded, but her smile was hesitant. "Yes, it was my grandfather's. He passed away recently, and he left the farm to me. But the truth is, the place is in terrible shape, practically abandoned." She paused, looking down at the table. "I feel like I should try to restore it, but I'm completely lost. I've never dealt with a farm before." Jack noticed the vulnerability in her voice, something Emily was clearly trying to mask. There was a hidden sadness in her words, something that indicated the journey wasn't just about the farm but also about finding a new path for herself. "It must be tough handling all this alone," Jack commented, trying to offer some comfort. Emily sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. "Yes, it is. I don't have any close relatives, so it's all fallen on me. The truth is, I'm scared of all this," she admitted, her eyes revealing more than she might have intended. At that moment, the food arrived, and both focused briefly on their plates. But Jack couldn't stop thinking about Emily's situation. She seemed as lost as he felt in his own life, and that created an unexpected connection between them. He could simply continue his life on the road, move on, and forget the stranger he had met by chance, but something prevented him from doing that. There was a spark of responsibility, or maybe even destiny, that he couldn't ignore. "Emily," Jack called softly, his voice gentler than before. "I know it's a lot to ask, but maybe I could help you with the farm, just for a few days, until you have an idea of where to start." Emily's request took him by surprise. There was sincerity and a touch of desperation in her voice, and Jack knew she was opening up more than she expected. He could say no and go his way, but something in him wouldn't allow that. "I can help, sure," Jack replied, feeling a bit surprised by his own decision. "I have a few days off ahead, and I can give you a hand." Emily couldn't hide the relief she felt at his response. Her smile was instant, and her eyes sparkled with gratitude. "I don't even know how to thank you, Jack. This means so much to me." They spent the rest of the lunch discussing the details. Emily explained that the farm was about an hour away, and that she planned to spend the night in a nearby hotel before heading there the next day. Jack agreed to accompany her, feeling that somehow, that day marked the beginning of something new in his life. As they left the restaurant, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Jack looked at Emily and felt that the decision to help might be the start of a journey he never imagined taking. As they said their goodbyes at the hotel door, Jack returned to his truck, his head full of thoughts. Something was changing inside him, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. But one thing was certain. He couldn't ignore what fate seemed to be putting in his path. The next morning, The sun had barely risen when Jack and Emily met in the hotel parking lot. The morning breeze was cold, a welcome change after the oppressive heat of the previous day. Both were eager to head to the farm, but there was tension in the air, a sense that they were about to enter unknown territory, both physically and emotionally. As the asphalt turned into a dirt road, the landscape around them became wilder and more isolated. Ancient trees lined the path, their branches intertwined, forming a natural tunnel that seemed to guide them into another world. The red earth of rural Oklahoma kicked up a fine cloud of dust under the tires, and Jack noticed how the silence around them seemed to absorb the sound of the engine. Everything indicated they were approaching a place that time had forgotten. Finally, as they rounded a final bend, they saw the farm's rusty gate. Emily stopped the car and took a deep breath before getting out. Jack parked right behind and got out of the truck, observing the property carefully. The sight before them was desolate. The farm was in an advanced state of abandonment. The barn, once imposing, was partially collapsed, and the main house had broken windows and peeling walls. The overgrown grass and weeds had taken over the land, turning the place into a shadow of what it once was. Emily walked slowly to the gate, her eyes fixed on the ruins of the house. Jack could see the sadness on her face, but also a silent determination. "I didn't know it was this bad," Emily murmured, as if talking to herself. Jack approached, trying to find the right words to comfort her. "It's going to take work, but the place looks like it has a solid structure. With the right effort, it can be a beautiful farm again." Emily smiled faintly, still absorbing the magnitude of the task ahead. "I hope so. Shall we start with the barn? I need a second opinion on what can be saved here." They walked together toward the barn. The building's interior was dark and smelled of mold and dust accumulated over the years. Beams of light pierced through the cracks in the cracked boards, illuminating the space with an almost supernatural glow. As they explored the interior, Jack noticed something in a dark corner, a wooden box covered by an old, dusty tarp. Curiosity led him to squat down and remove the tarp, revealing the box partially buried in the dirt floor. He carefully opened the lid, the sound of rusty hinges echoing through the barn. Inside, there was a pile of old papers, many of them yellowed with age. Among the documents, Jack found some handwritten letters. He picked up one and began reading aloud, feeling the tension increase with each word. "Dear son, the amount I mentioned is safe, but it will need to be found by someone who understands the value of what we've kept here. The farm is more than just a property. It's our legacy." Jack stopped reading and looked at Emily, who was now beside him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Did you know anything about this?" he asked, handing the letter to her. Emily took the letter with trembling hands and read it silently, her eyes widening as she absorbed the content. "These letters are from my grandfather," she said, almost in a whisper. "There were rumors in the family that he had hidden a considerable amount of money, but I never believed it was true." She looked at Jack, with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Could this money still be here? Jack looked around the decaying interior of the barn, considering the possibilities. The idea of hidden treasure seemed fanciful, but the old letters and documents gave an air of truth to the story. He knew they were just scratching the surface. "There's only one way to find out," Jack said, determined. "Let's take a good look at everything here. If he really hid something, there must be more clues. And if we found these letters, it's likely he left other indications." Emily nodded, still processing what was happening. The tension between them grew as they explored every corner of the barn, finding more papers but no clear indication of where the treasure might be. As the afternoon wore on and daylight began to fade, they decided to end the search for the day and return the next day with clearer heads. Jack knew they were at a crucial point. Something inside him said they were about to discover something that would change their lives forever. As they left the barn, the silence around them felt heavier, as if the place itself was guarding its secrets with a somber zeal. The next morning began with an air of expectation. Jack and Emily woke up early, driven by the anxiety to continue the search for the treasure Emily's grandfather had apparently left behind. The sky was cloudy, with a gray light that enveloped the farm in a mysterious and somewhat melancholic aura. When they returned to the barn, the atmosphere felt different. The space that had once seemed like just an abandoned storage building now seemed to harbor ancient secrets, almost as if the walls were whispering forgotten stories. Jack went straight to the spot where they had found the first clues the day before. He knew they couldn't leave any stone unturned until they found something concrete. While Emily reread the letters and documents, searching for any clues they might have missed, Jack focused his attention on the floorboards. There was something peculiar about the barn's foundations, as if part of the floor was slightly raised. He began to remove the boards carefully, trying not to damage the structure, which already seemed fragile. "Emily, come take a look at this," Jack called, his voice filled with anticipation. Emily dropped the papers and rushed over to him. Jack had already removed several boards, revealing a narrow opening in the dirt floor. Inside the cavity was an old safe, its metal oxidized by time but still solid. The air around them seemed to have stopped, as if the world was holding its breath along with them. "This is it. It has to be it," Emily whispered, her eyes fixed on the safe. Jack reached out, touching the cold, rough surface of the safe. There was a numeric combination, but without any clear indication of what the code might be, they would have to guess. Emily looked at Jack, her expression reflecting a mix of hope and fear. He knew they couldn't force the safe open. The metal, though old, was still sturdy enough to resist any attempts at breaking it. "What do we do now?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. Jack pondered for a moment before responding. "We need to go through those papers again. There has to be some clue about the combination or something that can help us open this." They returned to the main house, where the documents were spread out on an old table. Hurriedly, they began to sift through every line, every word written by Emily's grandfather. The silence in the room was dense, broken only by the sound of pages turning and the occasional sigh of frustration. Finally, Emily found something that seemed promising. A letter mentioning an important date for her grandfather, corresponding to his wedding anniversary. It was a long love story he had shared in his letters, always mentioning that date as the most significant moment of his life. "Maybe this is it," Emily said, her eyes fixed on the letter. Jack took the letter from her hands and returned to the barn, with Emily by his side. Back at the safe, he entered the combination based on the date they had found. His fingers hesitated for a second before turning the last number. The tension was almost palpable, and Emily held her breath, waiting for the result. Then, with a metallic click, the safe opened. The sound echoed through the barn like a victory bell, breaking the tense silence that had settled. Inside the safe were bars of gold and bags of old coins. There was also a small wooden box, which, when opened, revealed a collection of old jewelry, relics from a bygone era. The golden glow of the bars illuminated Emily's face, who fell to her knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. I can't believe this," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. Jack helped her up, sharing a smile of triumph and relief. Both were aware of the magnitude of what they had discovered, but also of the burden that discovery brought with it. "It looks like you've got a treasure on your hands," Jack said, trying to lighten the tension with a touch of humor. Emily laughed, still emotional, but soon her expression became serious. She looked at the treasure before them with an expression of responsibility and contemplation. "What am I going to do with all this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jack knew that this was a decision only Emily could make. He pondered for a moment before responding. "Whatever you do, it should be something that honors your grandfather's legacy." He clearly wanted this to stay in the family, to be used wisely. Emily nodded, still processing the enormity of what they had just found. The treasure was real, but the real challenge would be deciding how to use it. The responsibility weighed on her, but there was also a sense of renewed purpose. Emily knew she had to do something meaningful with that money, something that reflected her family's values and her grandfather's love for the farm. He always talked about how my grandmother wanted to turn this place into a refuge for abandoned animals, Emily said, her eyes still misty. Maybe it's time to make that dream come true. Jack remained silent, but his gaze showed unconditional support. He knew the final decision was Emily's, but he was willing to help her in any way necessary. The days following the discovery of the safe were a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. Emily, still shaken by the magnitude of what they had found, dedicated herself to studying her grandfather's letters more deeply, trying to understand the man behind those secrets. Jack, for his part, stayed by her side, helping her plan the next steps and offering moral support in every decision. One of the first things Emily did was consult a lawyer in the nearest town to ensure everything was legally in order. To her surprise, the documents were well preserved, and the lawyer confirmed that she was the sole legitimate heir to her grandfather's fortune. With that, she had full freedom to decide how to use the money. Meanwhile, Jack began working on the farm, restoring what he could so that the place could become habitable again. He was a practical man, finding satisfaction in fixing things and seeing the physical progress of his work. But at the same time, he felt that something else was changing within him. Life on the road, which had once given him so much freedom, now seemed distant and purposeless compared to what he was living there. Emily spent most of her time in the main house, organizing her thoughts and making plans. One afternoon, while tidying up her grandfather's old office, she found a final letter she had not yet read. It was addressed to her, though it had never been sent. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and began to read. "Dear Emily, if you are reading this letter, it's because you have finally discovered what I kept hidden all these years. I know it may seem strange, but there were reasons for me to keep this secret. This farm has always been more than just land and buildings to me. It was the place where your grandmother and I planned to spend our last days, caring for animals and living a simple life. When she was gone, the farm lost some of its shine, but I never stopped loving this place. I knew you would be the right person to inherit it, not because of blood, but because I always saw in you the same spirit that your grandmother had. A big heart that cares for others, whether human or animal. I don't know what you will do with all this, but I trust you to make the right decision. Use this fortune to create something good, something that would make your grandmother smile from above. And if you need help, trust the people around you. No one does anything great alone. With all my love, Grandpa." Emily finished reading the letter with tears in her eyes. Her grandfather's words touched her deeply, giving her the clarity she so desperately needed. Now she was sure of what she wanted to do. That night, she and Jack sat on the porch of the main house, looking out over the vastness of the property. The sun was setting, painting the sky with a deep orange hue, and the silence around them was broken only by the distant sound of crickets. "I've decided what I'm going to do with the money," Emily said, breaking the silence. Jack turned to her, curious. "I'm going to turn the farm into the refuge my grandmother always wanted. A place for abandoned and mistreated animals, where they can live in peace. I'm going to use the money to restore everything, build proper facilities, and hire people who share this dream. And I want you to stay here with me, Jack. Not just to help manage it, but to be part of this new life." Jack looked at her, surprised and touched by the invitation. He had spent so much time helping other people on their journeys, but now he saw an opportunity to finally find a greater purpose for himself. "Emily, he began, not quite knowing how to express what he felt. "I would be honored to be part of this. But are you sure this is what you want? To leave everything behind and start a new life here?" Emily smiled, with a look of peace he hadn't seen in her before. "Yes, more than ever. I was lost, not knowing where to go. But now everything makes sense. This farm, my grandfather's money, everything led me to this moment. And I want you to be with me on this journey, Jack. I don't know if I could do it without you. Jack nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. He knew that by accepting, he would be giving up his life on the road, but the prospect of building something so significant alongside Emily was irresistible. Then we're in this together, he said finally, smiling. The following days were filled with intense activity. With Jack's help and some local workers, Emily began transforming the farm. The barn was restored, new structures were built, and gradually the property began to come to life again. Jack found satisfaction in every task, from repairing fences to building shelters for the animals. He and Emily became an unbeatable team, united by a common purpose and the friendship that grew every day. As the project advanced, they began to receive the first animals. There were horses, dogs, cats, and even some sheep that had been rescued from abandonment. Seeing the farm finally fill with life and purpose was the realization of a dream that Emily didn't even know she had. The transformation occurring on the farm was more than just physical. Both Jack and Emily were changing as well, finding new meaning in their lives through the creation of that refuge. The months passed quickly, and the farm that once seemed destined for abandonment now flourished as a true sanctuary. Jack and Emily dedicated themselves body and soul to the project, and the property had transformed into a thriving and welcoming refuge for rescued animals. Over time, the place gained notoriety in the region, attracting volunteers and visitors interested in contributing and learning about the work being done there. One sunny autumn morning, Emily walked through the fields, watching the animals grazing peacefully. There was something deeply gratifying about seeing the result of so much hard work. She stopped near a group of horses that had been rescued from abusive situations. Now they were healthy, well-fed, and living harmoniously in that safe environment. Jack approached carrying a tool bag, ready for another day of work. He stopped beside Emily, observing the same scene. "It looks like we made it, doesn't it?" he said with a satisfied smile. Emily nodded, turning to him with a sparkle in her eyes. "We did, yes, but it wouldn't have been possible without you, Jack. I don't even know how to thank you for everything you've done." Jack shook his head, downplaying her words. "You don't need to thank me, Emily. I needed this as much as you did. In fact, more than I realized. Life on the road taught me a lot, but it never gave me a true purpose. Here, I feel like I've finally found a place I belong." Emily smiled with a look of tenderness. "I think we found our purpose together, and that's something rare, you know? To have someone to share a dream like this with." The bond between the two had strengthened over the months, evolving from a simple friendship into something deeper. They came to support each other in a way that went beyond the work on the farm. There was a connection, mutual respect, and admiration that grew every day. As autumn advanced, the farm continued to prosper. Emily went on with the restoration of the old buildings, transforming the main house into a comfortable residence for both of them and a place to manage the refuge. Jack, for his part, began organizing workshops and educational events, attracting people interested in learning more about animal care and rehabilitation. One afternoon, while tidying up the barn for a fundraising event, Emily found an old photo of her grandfather, with her grandmother beside him. They were on the farm, probably in the early 1950s, and the love and pride for the place were evident on their faces. She showed the photo to Jack, who smiled when he saw the image. "They were an inspiration, weren't they?" he commented. Emily agreed, feeling a wave of emotion as she looked at the photo. "Yes, they were, and I feel like we're finally honoring their legacy. I never knew my grandmother, but I think she would be proud of what we've done here." She put the photo in a frame and hung it on the office wall as a way to keep their memory alive in everything they did. The fundraising event was a success. The farm filled with visitors, some bringing donations, others offering volunteer help. There was a sense of community, of belonging, that Emily and Jack had never experienced before. Children ran through the fields, adults marveled at the animals, and everyone present seemed to share the same feeling of admiration for the work being done. As night fell and the last guests said their goodbyes, Emily and Jack sat on the porch of the main house, watching the farm's lights shining in the darkness. There was a stillness in the air, but also a sense of accomplishment. "I think I've never been so happy in my life," Emily confessed, her voice soft in the night silence. Jack turned to her, his eyes reflecting the soft light of the stars. "I know how you feel. Sometimes, fate leads us to places we never imagined and makes us find things we didn't know we needed." Emily smiled, touched by his words. She took Jack's hand, feeling the warmth and firmness of his touch. There was no need for words between them. Everything they had been through, the decisions they made, and the changes they experienced had led them to this moment of peace and contentment. As the wind gently blew through the trees around the farm, Emily and Jack knew that this was just the beginning of a new journey together. The farm was more than just a refuge for animals. It was a home, a place of renewal, where both had found a new purpose and new meaning in their lives. What began as a casual encounter on the road turned into something that changed their lives forever. And as they looked to the future, they knew that together, they could face any challenge that came, with the certainty that they had found exactly what they needed in each other.